She stood at the top of a marble staircase, 6 months pregnant, while her billionaire husband's rage echoed through their glass mansion. One push, one scream, and her baby was gone forever. But what happened next, he didn't expect the recording. He didn't expect his own brother to turn against him. And he definitely didn't expect the 5 other women who'd been waiting in the shadows for someone brave enough to fight back. This is the true story of how a tech CEO's perfect life shattered in a single courtroom and the woman who destroyed his empire piece by piece. If you want to see justice served, hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me what you would have done, and subscribe because stories like this, they need to be heard. Let's begin. The security camera footage shows a timestamp 11:47 p.m. A woman stands at the top of a marble staircase, 6 months pregnant, her hand protectively cradling her belly. The audio is crystal clear. "You think you can embarrass me?" A man's voice cuts through the frame, sharp with rage. "Sign the goddamn papers, Harper." "Brandon, please." Her voice shakes. "We can talk about this tomorrow when you're calm." "I am calm." His shadow enters the frame. "You want to see me not calm. You want to see what happens when you make a fool of me in front of my investors." "I just asked questions about the finances." "That's not." The sound of impact. A gasp. Then nothing but the sickening rhythm of a body tumbling down marble steps. The camera shows an empty staircase, a pool of blood spreading slowly across the white marble floor. Then the screen cuts to black. 3 words appear. 72 hours earlier. Harper Westfield sat in Dr. Ross's office, the ultrasound wand cold against her rounded stomach. She watched the monitor, where her baby's heartbeat pulsed in steady rhythm. The sound filled the small room like a promise. "Everything looks perfect, Doctor," Ross said, smiling as she measured the screen. "Right on track. 26 weeks. How are you feeling?" "Tired," Harper admitted. "But good, excited." Ross moved the wand, checking different angles. Then she paused. Her eyes shifted from the monitor to Harper's arm, where her sleeve had ridden up slightly. A bruise, dark purple and finger-shaped, marked the pale skin just above her elbow. "Harper," Dr. Ross's voice changed, becoming carefully neutral. "How did you get that bruise?" Harper glanced down, her stomach twisted. She'd forgotten to check the mirror before leaving the house that morning. Brandon's grip from 3 nights ago, when she'd asked about the prenup he wanted her to sign, when she'd made the mistake of suggesting she wanted her own lawyer to review it first. "Oh," Harper forced a light laugh, tugging her sleeve down. "I'm so clumsy lately. The baby weight throws off my balance. I walked right into the kitchen counter yesterday." Ross studied her for a long moment. Harper held her gaze, kept her smile steady. She'd learned how to lie over the past 2 years of marriage, how to make excuses, how to protect Brandon's image as the brilliant young tech billionaire, the man who'd built Westfield Innovations from nothing, the man everyone in Seattle admired. "I see wa." Dr. Ross made a note in Harper's file. "Well, be careful. Falls can be dangerous when you're pregnant." "I will, I promise." But as Harper left the office 20 minutes later, she caught Dr. Ross watching her through the window, phone pressed to her ear. The concerned expression on the doctor's face made Harper's chest tighten. She knew that look. She'd seen it on her mother's face, her sister's face, her former colleagues' faces whenever they visited. The look that said they suspected something but couldn't quite prove it. The look that made her lie even more convincingly because if anyone knew the truth, if anyone saw behind the perfect facade of their marriage, Brandon would destroy her. He'd promised he would. That evening, Harper stood in their home, a glass mansion overlooking Lake Washington that had been featured in Architectural Digest last year. Brandon liked to tell reporters that the transparent walls represented his commitment to transparency in business. Harper thought they were fitting in a different way. Everyone could see in, but what they saw was an illusion, a beautiful lie. She was preparing dinner when she heard Brandon's car in the driveway. Her shoulders tensed automatically. She checked the kitchen. Everything perfect. Dinner ready at exactly 6:30, the way he liked. The table set with the expensive china his mother had given them. "No mistakes tonight. Please, no mistakes." Brandon walked in wearing his signature black turtleneck and designer jeans, looking every inch the visionary CEO. His face lit up when he saw her, and for just a moment, Harper remembered why she'd fallen in love with him 4 years ago. The charm, the brilliant mind, the way he'd made her feel like the most important person in the world. "Something smells amazing," he said, kissing her cheek. Then his hand slid to her stomach. "How's my little genius?" "Active today. The doctor said everything looks perfect." "Of course it does." Brandon poured himself a scotch from the bar. "With my genes and your looks, this kid's going to be unstoppable." Harper served dinner. Brandon talked about his day, about the upcoming IPO that would make Westfield Innovations worth $5 billion, about the tech journalist calling him the next Steve Jobs. She listened, asked the right questions, laughed at the right moments. Then the staff left for the night. The house fell silent except for the sound of their forks on china. Brandon's entire demeanor shifted. "So," his voice went flat, cold. "You want to tell me what you said to David Morrison at the charity gala yesterday?" Harper's throat went dry. David Morrison was Brandon's lead investor. She'd made small talk with him for maybe 5 minutes. I I don't understand. I just asked him about his daughter's college applications. He mentioned she was applying to law schools. And you told him you used to be a lawyer." "I was a lawyer. I passed the bar. I worked at Sterling and Associates for 3 years before I married you." Brandon set down his fork with deliberate precision. "Before I gave you this life, this house, that ring on your finger worth more than you made in a year at that pathetic firm. Brandon, I didn't mean—" His fist slammed on the table. The dishes jumped. Harper flinched, instinctively wrapping her arms around her belly. "You made me look like a fool," Brandon said, his voice deadly quiet now. Quiet was worse than yelling. "David asked me why my wife gave up such a promising career. Asked if I was one of those men who needs to keep his wife dependent. Do you understand what you did?" "I'm sorry, Harper's voice came out small. "I'll apologize to him. I'll tell him I chose to stop working, that you supported whatever I wanted. You're lucky I don't throw you out right now." Brandon stood, looming over her. "You're lucky I married you at all. You were nobody. Harper, some mid-level associate at a second-tier firm, drowning in student debt. I made you somebody. I gave you everything." He grabbed her arm, the same place as before. His fingers dug into the bruise. Harper bit back a cry. "Don't ever embarrass me again," he whispered. "Understood." "Yes." He released her, smiled. The charm flickered back on like a switch. "Good, I'm going to my office. Clean this up." Harper sat alone in the dining room, her arm throbbing, her baby kicking against her ribs. She stared at the glass walls, at the city lights reflected on the lake below, all those windows, and nobody could see the truth. But in her pocket, her phone rested heavy with possibility. An idea was forming, a desperate, dangerous idea. She opened her voice recorder app, pressed record, slipped the phone back into her pocket. If she couldn't prove the truth now, maybe she could prove it later, if she survived long enough. 3 days after the charity gala incident, Harper lay awake at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling. Brandon slept beside her, one arm thrown across her side of the bed, possessive even in sleep. She'd learned not to move. Any disturbance might wake him, and she never knew which version of Brandon she'd get, the charming one or the monster. Her phone, hidden under her pillow, had been recording for 72 hours now. Every conversation, every threat whispered in the dark. Every time his voice shifted from honey to venom. The audio quality wasn't perfect, but it was evidence, real, undeniable evidence. The question was what to do with it. She couldn't go to the police. Brandon's lawyer would bury her. She couldn't tell her family. They'd already chosen Brandon's side months ago, charmed by his money and status. Even her mother had said, "You're so lucky, Harper. Men like him don't come along every day." Her sister had been blunter. "Stop complaining. So he has a temper. All successful men do. You think you'd find better." Maybe they were right. Maybe this was as good as it got. Her baby kicked, as if disagreeing. Harper pressed her hand to her belly. No, her child deserved better than growing up watching their father abuse their mother. Deserved better than learning that love looked like control and fear. She had to find a way out, but carefully. So carefully. The next evening, Brandon came home in a rage. Harper heard it in the slam of his car door, the heavy footsteps on the marble entryway. She'd been preparing dinner, but her hands froze over the cutting board. "Harper," his voice echoed through the house. "Get in here. Now." She walked to the living room, drying her hands on a towel. Brandon stood by the bar, tie loosened, face flushed with anger and alcohol. A Scotch bottle sat open on the counter, already half empty. "The Mitchell deal fell through," he said. 6 months of work, 3 million in projected revenue. Gone. "I'm sorry." Harper kept her voice calm, neutral. "Is there anything I can do?" "Yeah." Brandon poured another drink. "You can explain why I got a call from David Morrison's office today. Apparently, his wife told him I'm an abusive husband, that I control you, that I forced you to quit your job." Harper's blood ran cold. "What? I never said that. I never spoke to his wife." "But you spoke to him, and now his wife has ideas. And now he's pulling out of the IPA film." Brandon downed the scotch in one gulp. "Do you understand what you've cost me? Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Brandon, I swear, I only talked about his daughter's college." "Shut up." He advanced on her. "I'm so sick of your excuses, your weakness, your constant need to ruin everything I build." Harper backed away. "Please, the baby, the baby." Brandon laughed bitterly. "You think I wanted a baby? You think I'm ready to be tied down by some crying brat? You trapped me. Harper, you knew my mother wanted grandchildren, knew it would look bad if I left you while you were pregnant." The words cut deeper than any bruise. Harper had thought, desperately hoped, that the baby would change him, that becoming a father would bring back the man she'd married. Brandon grabbed a stack of papers from his briefcase. "Sign these, Audrey. What are they?" "A revised prenup. You get nothing if we divorce. No alimony, no house, nothing. And you transfer your trust fund to me immediately. Consider it payment for the Morrison deal you destroyed." Harper stared at the papers. Her trust fund was the only money she had that Brandon couldn't access, the only escape route if she ever needed it. I need to have a lawyer review." "A lawyer?" Brandon's voice went dangerously quiet. "You need a lawyer. You think you get to question me? It's my money. My grandmother left it to me. Your grandmother is dead." Brandon threw his glass. It shattered against the wall, inches from Harper's head. "You have nothing without me. You are nothing without me." Harper's phone sat in her pocket, recording everything. Her hand instinctively moved to check it, make sure it was still on. The motion caught Brandon's attention. "What's in your pocket?" "Nothing, just my phone." "Give it to me." "Brandon, give me the goddamn phone." "Harper." He lunged for her. Harper stumbled backward, hand protectively over her belly. Her foot caught on the edge of the rug. She reached for the railing, but Brandon's hand shoved her shoulder. For one endless moment, Harper hung suspended at the top of the marble staircase. Then gravity took over. The world became a kaleidoscope of pain. Her shoulder hit the edge of a step. Her head bounced off marble. Her hands instinctively wrapped around her belly, trying to protect the baby. But she couldn't stop falling. When she finally landed at the bottom, sprawled across the cold floor, the pain was so intense she couldn't breathe, couldn't scream, could only lie there, feeling warmth spread beneath her. Blood. So much blood. Brandon appeared at the top of the stairs, his face pale. For a moment, genuine fear flickered across his features. "Harper." His voice cracked. "Harper, I didn't mean..." She tried to speak, but only a whimper came out. "Her baby. Oh God, her baby." Brandon's phone was in his hand. For one desperate second, Harper thought he'd call for help. Instead, though, he scrolled through his contacts. His voice, when he spoke, was pure calculation. "Eric, I need a cleaner. Now, there's been an accident. Make sure the press doesn't find out before I can control the narrative." Harper's vision blurred. The last thing she heard before darkness took her was Brandon's voice, cold and businesslike, discussing damage control with his business partner while his wife and child lay dying on the floor below. When Harper woke in the hospital, the fluorescent lights burned her eyes. Tubes ran from her arms. Machines beeped steadily. The smell of antiseptic filled her nose. Dr. Ross's face appeared above her, lined with sorrow. "Harper, you're awake." You're in Seattle Grace Hospital. You've been unconscious for 6 hours. You had significant trauma from the fall, but we stabilized you. Fall. The word hung between them. Not push, not assault, fall. Harper tried to speak. Her throat was raw. My baby, doctor. Ross's expression told her everything before the words came. I'm so sorry, Harper. We did everything we could, but the trauma was too severe. We couldn't save the baby. You lost too much blood, and Ross's voice broke. I'm so sorry. The sound that came from Harper's throat wasn't human. It was the sound of a soul shattering. She curled onto her side, hands pressed to her now flat stomach, and screamed until her voice gave out. Later, much later, when the sedatives had worn off enough for her to think, Brandon appeared in her hospital room. He wore a perfectly pressed suit and carried an enormous bouquet of white roses. Harper. He rushed to her bedside, taking her hand. The nurse who'd been checking her vitals gave him a warm smile. The devoted husband, her expression said, the moment they were alone. Brandon's face transformed. He leaned close, his lips brushing her ear. There's a police detective who wants to talk to you, he whispered. You're going to tell him you fell, that you were dizzy from the pregnancy, lost your balance. You understand if you say anything else, I will destroy you. I'll make sure everyone knows you're unstable, that you killed our baby with your clumsiness. I'll take everything you have left. Harper stared at him, at the man she'd loved, the man who'd just threatened her while she lay in a hospital bed, grieving the child he'd killed. But then she remembered, the phone in her pocket, still recording when she fell, the pocket that the EMTs had emptied, placing her belongings in a clear plastic bag that now sat in the locked drawer beside her bed. Okay, she whispered. I'll tell them I fell. Brandon smiled, relieved. He kissed her forehead. When the detective entered 5 minutes later, Brandon played the perfect concerned husband while Harper told her lie. But late that night, when Brandon left and the hospital finally quieted, Harper retrieved her phone from the drawer. Her hands shook as she checked the recording. It had stopped when she hit the stairs. But everything before that moment was crystal clear. Brandon's rage, his threats, the sound of his hand shoving her, her scream as she fell. She had him. She had proof. The question was whether it would be enough, whether anyone would believe her, whether she was strong enough to fight back. Harper looked out the hospital window at the Seattle skyline. Somewhere in that city was Brandon's younger brother, Garrett, the one member of the Westfield family who'd never liked Brandon, the investigative journalist who'd stopped coming to family dinners years ago after some fight Harper had never learned the details of. She found his number in her contacts, sent a single text, I need help, please. Then she closed her eyes and waited for the world to either save her or destroy her completely. Garrett Westfield sat in his car outside Seattle Grace Hospital at 3 a.m., staring at Harper's text message. He'd read it 6 times in the past hour, thumb hovering over the call button. He hadn't spoken to his brother in 2 years, and even thinking about Brandon made his jaw clench with rage. But Harper was different. Harper was trapped. He'd known something was wrong the first time he met her, at their engagement party 4 years ago. The way she'd flinched when Brandon touched her unexpectedly. The way she'd measured every word before speaking, like she was constantly taking a test she couldn't afford to fail. Garrett had pulled her aside that night, asked if she was sure about marrying Brandon. He's wonderful, Harper had said, smiling too bright. I'm so lucky. The same words his mother always used, the same practiced script. Garrett had investigated his brother twice since then. Off the books, using his contacts from his years at the Seattle Tribune, he'd found 3 ex-girlfriends who'd signed at NDAs. Financial irregularities in Westfield Innovations books. A pattern of controlling behavior that made Garrett's stomach turn. But every time he tried to warn someone, Brandon's lawyers had shut him down. His own family had accused him of jealousy, of trying to sabotage his successful older brother out of spite. Now Harper was reaching out, after midnight. From a hospital, Garrett made his decision. He texted back ground floor parking garage. West corner, 20 minutes. When Harper appeared, Garrett barely recognized her. The vibrant woman from the engagement party had been replaced by someone hollowed out. She moved carefully, like every step hurt. Her eyes were empty in a way that made Garrett's chest tighten. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "What did he do?" "Harper." She told him everything. The years of escalating abuse, the threats, the control, and finally the staircase. Her voice stayed flat, detached, like she was narrating someone else's story. When she finished, Garrett's hands were clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. "I'm going to kill him." "No." Harper pulled her phone from her pocket. "You're going to help me destroy him legally. I have recordings, hours of them, including the night he pushed me." She pressed play. Brandon's voice filled the car, crystal clear, undeniable. "You're lucky I married you. You were nobody. I made you somebody." Then the escalation, the rage, the threats, the sound of impact and Harper's scream. When it ended, Garrett sat in silence for a long moment. Then he reached into his back seat and pulled out a laptop. "I've been investigating Brandon for 3 years," he said, opening files. "Money laundering through shell companies, embezzlement, fraud. I couldn't prove enough to publish. But combined with your evidence of abuse, attempted murder." He looked at Harper. "We can end him. Completely." Hope flickered across Harper's face, then died just as quickly. "He has the best lawyers in Seattle. His mother sits on the board of half the charities in the city. Everyone loves him. Everyone loves the mask." Garrett started typing. "But masks crack, and when they do, the fall is spectacular. How much do you trust me?" Harper studied him, really looked at him for the first time. Garrett was everything Brandon wasn't. Quiet where Brandon was loud. Thoughtful where Brandon was impulsive. His career as an investigative journalist paid a fraction of what Brandon made, but he'd built it through actual work instead of manipulation. "I trust you," Harper said. "What do we do? You go back to him?" "What? He can't know we're working together. You need to play the broken wife. Defeated, submissive, let him think he won." Garrett pulled out a small device that looked like a pen. "This is a recording device, better quality than your phone. Harder to detect. Get him on tape admitting what he did. Get him comfortable enough to brag about it." Harper's hands shook as she took the device. "What if he catches me? Then you run, you call me, and I get you out." "But Harper," Garrett met her eyes. "If you do this, if you commit to taking him down, there's no halfway. He'll fight back with everything he has. It's going to get worse before it gets better." Harper thought about her baby, the child who would never take a first breath, never grow up, never have a chance at life because of Brandon's rage. She thought about the woman she used to be, the lawyer who'd once stood in courtrooms and fought for justice. "I want to destroy him," she said quietly. "I want to take everything he has and burn it to the ground. Can you help me do that?" Garrett smiled grimly. "I thought you'd never ask." Over the next 2 weeks, Harper became the perfect victim. She returned to the glass mansion, apologized to Brandon for causing him stress, told him she understood it was an accident. She signed documents without reading them, agreed to see his therapist who would testify she was mentally unstable, played the role of the grieving mother too broken to fight back. And every night she recorded him. Brandon grew bolder, more comfortable. The guilt he'd shown in the hospital disappeared. One night, drunk on whiskey and victory, he finally said what Harper needed to hear. "You know the best part about that fall?" Brandon laughed, sprawled across their bed. "Everyone believes it was an accident. Even your mother, even your sister. They all think you're just clumsy. Weak Harper who can't handle a little stress. Brandon, and that baby." He shook his head. "I'm actually relieved. I wasn't ready for a kid. This way, I can still leave you whenever I want. No child support, no custody battles. Just sign the divorce papers and walk away when I'm bored." Harper's hand rested in her pocket, touching the recording device. "You pushed me on purpose." "Of course I did. You wouldn't sign the prenup. You were going to cost me millions in the divorce. Had to make sure you understood who's in control." He rolled over, pinning her with his gaze. "That was your own fault, Harper, for defying me." Perfect, clear, undeniable confession. Harper smiled at him through tears. "You're right. It was my fault. I should never have questioned you." Brandon kissed her forehead, satisfied. Within 10 minutes, he was snoring. Harper slipped from the bed, grabbed her phone, and texted Garrett, "I have it. Everything we need. Meet at the lawyer's office tomorrow." Garrett texted back, "Time to make our move." The next morning, Harper sat across from Sarah Martinez, one of Seattle's most feared divorce attorneys. Sarah listened to the recordings with growing fury. "This is airtight," Sarah said finally. "Attempted murder, assault, confession on tape. We file for divorce, get a restraining order, and press criminal charges simultaneously. The DA will have to prosecute." When Harper asked, "Tomorrow morning," we hit him with everything at once, before he knows what's happening. Sarah smiled sharply. "Mrs. Westfield, by tomorrow afternoon, your husband will be in handcuffs." Harper allowed herself to feel hope for the first time in weeks. Maybe the legal system would work. Maybe justice would prevail. Maybe she could actually win. "There's one more thing," Garrett said quietly. "The financial crimes. I need 2 more weeks to verify the evidence. But once Harper files for divorce, Brandon's going to scramble to hide assets. We need to move fast on both fronts." 2 weeks, Sarah agreed. "Harper gets the restraining order tomorrow. We gather more evidence. Then we destroy him completely." Harper nodded. She could survive 2 more weeks. She'd survived 3 years. What was 2 more weeks? She had no idea that 24 hours later, her entire plan would fall apart. The law offices of Martinez and Associates smelled like leather and expensive coffee. Harper sat in the conference room, hands folded on the polished mahogany table, while Sarah Martinez laid out stacks of documents. "Everything's ready," Sarah said. "Restraining order, divorce petition, copies of the recordings for the DA. We file in 3 hours. Brandon will be served before lunch. By tonight, you'll be safe." Harper's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Check your email. Urgent." She opened her laptop. The email had no subject line, just an attachment, a video file. "Don't open that," Garrett warned, but Harper had already clicked. The video showed her in their bedroom, talking to her phone. "I need to get evidence," her recorded voice said. "I need to record him confessing. Then I'll have proof." The angle was wrong. Too high. Then Harper understood. Brandon had installed cameras. In their bedroom, in the bathroom, throughout the entire house. Her stomach dropped. The video cut to another clip. Harper at Garrett's car in the hospital parking garage. "I want to destroy him." Her voice echoed. "I want to take everything he has and burn it to the ground." Sarah's face went pale. "He knows. He's known the whole time." Harper's phone rang. Brandon's name on the screen. "Don't answer it," Garrett said. Harper answered. "Put it on speaker." "Hello, Harper?" Brandon's voice was cheerful. "Enjoying your meeting. I particularly liked the part where Martinez called me a monster. Very dramatic." "You bugged your own office," Sarah demanded. "My office? My house? My car? My wife?" Brandon laughed. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice Harper suddenly becoming so compliant? I've known about every recording, every meeting, every pathetic attempt at rebellion." Harper found her voice. "Then why let us continue?" "Because I wanted evidence of your conspiracy against me. And now I have it. Hours of footage showing you plotting with my brother, manipulating recordings, setting me up. My lawyers are filing first. Harper, right now, actually, claiming you're mentally unstable from the pregnancy loss, that you fabricated evidence, that you're trying to extort me." Sarah grabbed her laptop, fingers flying. "He filed 15 minutes ago. Restraining order against Harper. Petition for involuntary psychiatric evaluation. Expert witness testimony from Dr. Phillips." "Dr. Phillips," Harper whispered. "Brandon's therapist, who will testify that you've shown signs of delusional behavior, violent tendencies, and elaborate fantasies of revenge." Brandon's voice dripped with satisfaction. "Oh, and Harper, that recording of me confessing, my lawyers are claiming you edited it. We have audio forensic experts ready to testify it's been manipulated. By the time we're done, you'll be lucky if you're not charged with attempted fraud." The phone went dead. Harper stared at the table, mind reeling. She'd been so careful, so clever. And Brandon had been 3 steps ahead. "We didn't tire time. We can fight this," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. The recordings are real. The bruises are documented. Dr. Ross will testify that Harper had some suspicious injuries, but nothing conclusive. Garrett had pulled up Brandon's filing on his phone. He's claiming Harper caused her own injuries to frame him, that she's had a history of self-harm since college. I've never, Harper started, then stopped. Brandon had spent 3 years controlling her narrative. Who would believe her now? Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. This time, a photo. Harper and Garrett at a cafe 2 days ago, heads bent close together. Another photo with Slayon, them outside her hospital room. Another, them in his car. The accompanying message, your husband's brother, really? Harper, how desperate are you? He's building a case that you've been having an affair. Sarah said quietly, that the baby might not even have been his. That you're a vindictive, unstable woman trying to destroy him. Harper felt the walls closing in. Every move she'd made, Brandon had countered. Every piece of evidence she'd gathered, he'd poisoned. She'd thought she was hunting him, but she'd been the prey all along. We need to go public, Garrett said. Release everything to the press before he controls the narrative. Too late. Sarah turned her laptop around. Seattle Tribune headline, Tech CEO's wife files false abuse claims after affair with his brother. Below it, photos, Harper and Garrett. Quotes from anonymous sources close to the Westfield family describing Harper's increasingly erratic behavior, her isolation, her accusations that nobody believed. Within an hour, Harper's phone exploded with notifications. Former friends demanding explanations. Her mother, crying, asking how Harper could do this to such a wonderful man. Her sister, blunt, you've lost your mind. Nobody believed her. Nobody cared about the recordings or the bruises or the truth. Brandon had won. Harper sat in Sarah's office as the lawyer made phone calls, trying to salvage the case. But every call ended the same way. Brandon's team was too powerful, too prepared, too ruthless. I need to tell you something, Sarah said finally. Brandon's lawyers contacted me. They're offering a settlement. You drop all charges, sign an NDA, leave Seattle. In exchange, you get $500,000 and they don't pursue criminal charges against you for fraud and defamation. That's extortion, Garrett snapped. That's reality. Sarah looked at Harper. If you fight this, you could end up in jail or in a psychiatric facility. Brandon has unlimited resources in a vendetta. I've seen cases like this before. The victim ends up destroyed while the abuser walks free. Harper thought about her empty bank account, her dead baby, her shattered reputation, the recordings that nobody would believe, the truth that had become a lie through sheer force of Brandon's will. Maybe this was karma. Maybe she deserved this for not leaving sooner, for staying 3 years, for thinking she could beat a man who'd spent his entire life winning at any cost. I'll take the settlement, she whispered. Harper. No. Garrett started. I'll take it, she repeated, louder this time. I'll sign whatever he wants. I just want this to end. Sarah nodded slowly. I'll tell them you accept. That night, Harper sat alone in a hotel room. Brandon had changed the locks on the mansion. Her credit cards were frozen. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing with hateful messages from Brandon's supporters. She opened the bottle of prescription painkillers from the hospital, shook them into her palm, counted them. Enough to make everything stop hurting. Enough to make the world go away. Her phone rang. Not Brandon, not Garrett, a number she barely recognized. Dr. Ross? Harper almost didn't answer, but something made her press Harper, Dr. Ross's voice was urgent. Don't do whatever you're thinking of doing right now, please. How did you? Because I've seen this before, too many times, and I'm not going to let it happen again. Dr. Ross took a breath. Harper, I believe you, and I'm not the only one. For the first time in hours, Harper felt something other than despair. What do you mean? I mean, Brandon Westfield isn't as invincible as he thinks. And tomorrow morning, you're going to meet some people who are going to help you take him down for good. Harper looked at the pills in her hand, then at the phone. Who, she asked. The women he hurt before you, Ross said. The ones who signed NDAs and disappeared. The ones who've been waiting for someone brave enough to fight back. Harper closed her fist around the pills. I'm not brave. Yes, Ross said firmly. You're alive. You're still here when that's the bravest thing of all. Harper set the pills on the nightstand. Tell me where to meet you. The coffee shop was in a neighborhood Harper had never visited, tucked between a bookstore and a yoga studio. Dr. Ross waited at a corner table, along with three other women. Harper, Dr. Ross said gently, I want you to meet some people. The first woman extended her hand. She was maybe 35, with sharp eyes and perfect posture. Jennifer Morrison. I was engaged to Brandon 5 years ago. The second woman, younger, with nervous energy, spoke next. Alexis Turner. I dated him in college. The third woman was older, composed. Patricia Whitmore. I worked for Westfield Innovations until 2 years ago. I was his executive assistant. Harper shook each hand, her mind reeling. You all got out alive. Jennifer finished. Barely. They spent the next hour sharing stories. Jennifer described how Brandon had isolated her from her friends, controlled her money, hit her when she tried to leave. She'd signed an NDA for $2 million, moved across the country, changed her name. Alexis told of psychological abuse so severe she'd attempted suicide twice. The NDA she signed came with mandatory therapy sessions that Brandon's lawyers monitored to ensure she never spoke about him. Patricia's story was different. She'd witnessed Brandon's financial crimes, tried to report them. He'd threatened her family, hacked her computer, destroyed her career. The NDA she signed included a clause that she'd never work in tech again. Why come forward now, Harper asked. The NDAs are unenforceable if we can prove duress or criminal activity. Patricia said, I've been documenting everything for 2 years. Every transaction, every email, every phone call, waiting for the right moment. And Brandon's PR campaign against you is that moment, Jennifer added. He got sloppy, too confident. The surveillance footage he's using installing cameras in your bedroom without consent is illegal in Washington. The audio recordings he claims you edited. We have the originals. He submitted false evidence to the court. Dr. Ross leaned forward. I've been documenting suspected abuse cases involving Brandon for 3 years. Every woman who came through my ER with suspicious injuries married to or dating him. The patterns are undeniable. And I've been in contact with Detective Marcus Shaw, the detective who interviewed me at the hospital. Harper remembered him. Kind eyes, sharp questions. He never believed Brandon's story. Dr. Ross said, he's been building a case quietly, but he needed more evidence, more witnesses, more proof of pattern behavior. Patricia pulled out a laptop. Between the four of us, we have financial records proving Brandon embezzled $17 million from Westfield Innovations. Phone records showing he threatened Alexis's family, medical records showing Jennifer's injuries, and your recordings, Harper, which prove he's still engaging in the same behavior. But his lawyers already poisoned all my evidence, Harper protested. In civil court, Jennifer corrected, not criminal court. And fraud, assault, attempted murder. Those are criminal charges. The DA can't ignore this much evidence from this many victims. Harper felt hope stirring again. Fragile as new ice. What do? We fight, Patricia said simply. Together, not as individual victims he can discredit, but as a coalition, a pattern, undeniable proof that Brandon Westfield is a serial abuser and criminal. Over the next week, they built their case. Patricia's financial records, showing shell companies Brandon used to launder money, Jennifer's medical files, documenting broken ribs and a fractured wrist, Alexis's therapy notes, describing suicidal ideation caused by psychological abuse, Dr. Ross's documentation of suspicious injuries across multiple women, and Harper's recordings, now backed by forensic analysis from an independent expert who confirmed they were unedited. Garrett added his investigative research, 3 years of digging into Brandon's business practices, interviews with former employees, evidence of fraud that went back to Westfield Innovations' founding. Detective Shaw coordinated everything. We're not just going after him for the staircase incident, he explained. We're building a RICO case, racketeering, fraud, assault, pattern of abuse. By the time we're done, Brandon Westfield won't just lose his company, he'll lose his freedom. On the morning they planned to take everything to the DA, Harper's phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Harper, Mallory Pierce's voice, Harper's best friend since college. We need to talk. Harper's stomach dropped. She hadn't heard from Mallory since the scandal broke. Assumed Mallory believed Brandon's lies like everyone else. I don't have anything to say to you, Harper started. Yes, you do, because I need to tell you something. About me and Brandon. The world tilted. What about you and Brandon? Harper whispered. A long pause, then, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. It started 8 months ago. He said you were cold, that the marriage was over, that Mallory's voice cracked. He told me you were having an affair with Garrett. I believed him. God, Harper, I believed everything he said. Harper couldn't breathe. Her best friend, her maid of honor at the wedding, the person she'd trusted most in the world besides Garrett. Why are you telling me now? Because he just tried to buy my silence. Offered me $500,000 to testify that you've been erratic, that you told me you were planning to frame him. And I realized, Mallory sobbed, I realized he's been playing me, using me, just like he used you. I'm another weapon in his arsenal. Mallory, I have text messages, emails, photos, everything. I'll testify against him. I'll tell the truth about the affair, about what he said about you, about everything. I know it doesn't make up for what I did, but please let me help. Harper looked at the women around the coffee shop table. Jennifer, Alexis, Patricia, Dr. Ross, Garrett, all victims of Brandon in different ways, all refusing to let him win. Okay, Harper said quietly. Come to this address. Bring everything you have. When Mallory arrived an hour later, the coalition grew stronger. Her testimony would prove Brandon had lied about the affair with Garrett. Her messages showed his manipulation, his planning, his casual cruelty. We're ready, Detective Shaw said that afternoon. I'm taking everything to the DA tomorrow morning. By tomorrow night, there'll be a warrant for Brandon's arrest. Harper felt exhaustion settling into her bones. What if his lawyers stop it? What if he's high? Then we go to the press, Garrett said. All of us. Together, every victim, every piece of evidence. We make it impossible for anyone to ignore. Patricia nodded. I spent 2 years being silent, hiding. I'm done hiding. Me too, Jennifer said. Me too, Alexis whispered. Mallory, tears streaming down her face, added her voice. Me too. They all looked at Harper. She thought about her baby, the life Brandon had stolen, the years of fear and pain, the woman she used to be, confident and strong, before Brandon had methodically broken her down. Me too, Harper said. I'm done being silent. The next morning, Detective Shaw walked into the district attorney's office with 3 boxes of evidence and 6 women ready to testify. By afternoon, a warrant was issued for Brandon Westfield's arrest. By evening, news trucks surrounded Westfield Innovations. And by night, Harper watched on television as Brandon was led out of his office in handcuffs, his face frozen in shock, while reporters shouted questions he couldn't answer. For the first time in 3 years, Harper smiled. The footage of Brandon's arrest played on every news channel in Seattle. Harper watched from Patricia's living room, surrounded by the coalition of women who'd made this moment possible. Tech CEO Brandon Westfield was arrested today on multiple charges, including fraud, embezzlement, and assault. The news anchor announced. The arrest comes after 6 women came forward with allegations of abuse and financial crimes spanning 7 years. The camera showed Brandon in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled, his face carefully blank. But Harper saw the rage in his eyes, the disbelief. Brandon Westfield didn't get arrested. Brandon Westfield always won. Not today. The DA's office has charged Westfield with 17 counts of fraud, 5 counts of assault, and 1 count of attempted murder. The anchor continued. His bail hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Harper's phone buzzed. Sarah Martinez calling. Turn on Channel 7, Sarah said. Brandon's lawyers are giving a statement. Harper switched channels. Brandon's lead attorney, Marcus Crawford, stood on the courthouse steps surrounded by microphones. Mr. Westfield maintains his complete innocence, Crawford said smoothly. These charges are the result of a coordinated smear campaign by disgruntled former employees and a mentally unstable ex-wife. We're confident that when all the facts come to light, Mr. Westfield will be fully exonerated. Is it true one of the victims is his wife? A reporter shouted. Mrs. Westfield has unfortunately suffered severe psychological trauma from a pregnancy loss. Crawford replied, her accusations are the product of grief and, frankly, delusion. Mr. Westfield has tried to get her the help she needs, but she's refused treatment. Harper felt the familiar shame rising. Even now, even with 6 victims and boxes of evidence, Brandon's lawyers were spinning the narrative, making her the villain. Don't listen to him, Jennifer said firmly. That's what they do. They try to isolate us, make us doubt ourselves. But we have evidence. The truth will come out in court. The bail hearing the next morning drew a media circus. Harper sat in the back of the courtroom, baseball cap pulled low, flanked by Garrett and Dr. Ross. Brandon's mother, Judith, sat in the front row, her face like carved ice. The prosecutor, Assistant DA Rebecca Walsh, stood before the judge. Your Honor, the defendant poses a significant flight risk. He has access to substantial funds, private aircraft, and international connections. He's also demonstrated a pattern of threatening and harassing witnesses. Brandon's lawyer argued for bail. Mr. Westfield is a respected businessman with deep ties to the community. He's not a flight risk. These charges are baseless. Bail is set at $10 million, the judge interrupted. The defendant will surrender his passport and submit to GPS monitoring. Next case, $10 million. Brandon would post it within an hour. Harper felt panic rising. He's going to come after me. Not if we move first, Garrett said. The press conference is in 2 hours. We're going public with everything. The coalition gathered at the Seattle Press Club. 6 women, 1 doctor, 1 journalist, and a table full of evidence. Cameras packed the room. Harper's hands shook as she adjusted the microphone. Jennifer spoke first, describing her relationship with Brandon 5 years ago. The control, the violence, the NDA she'd been forced to sign. Alexis went next, her voice barely steady, explaining the psychological abuse that had driven her to attempt suicide twice. Patricia detailed the financial crimes she'd witnessed, the threats to her family, the systematic destruction of her career. Mallory, crying openly, confessed to the affair and how Brandon had manipulated her into believing Harper was the problem. Dr. Ross presented her medical documentation, the pattern of injuries across multiple women, all connected to Brandon. Garrett laid out the financial evidence, shell companies, embezzlement, money laundering, a criminal enterprise disguised as a tech company. Then it was Harper's turn. She stood, looking at the cameras, at the reporters, at the faces of people who would judge whether she was telling the truth or just another bitter ex-wife. My name is Harper Westfield, she said quietly. 3 weeks ago, my husband pushed me down a marble staircase. I was 6 months pregnant. I lost my baby. Brandon told me it was my fault, that I was clumsy, that I should be grateful he didn't do worse. Her voice grew stronger. For 3 years, I lived in fear. I made excuses for his behavior. I believed the lies he told about me. I thought I was alone, but I'm not alone. None of us are. She pulled out her phone. This is a recording from the night before he pushed me. Listen to his words. Listen to how he talks about the woman he married. Brandon's voice filled the room. You were nobody. I made you somebody. You're lucky I don't throw you out right now. Gasps rippled through the press corps. Harper played more. The escalation, the threats, the rage. So finally, the recording from 2 weeks later where Brandon confessed on tape, that fall was your own fault for defying me. When the recordings ended, silence hung heavy. I'm done being silent, Harper said. I'm done letting him control the narrative. Brandon Westfield is an abuser and a criminal, and I'm going to spend every day of his trial making sure the world knows it. The press conference exploded. Questions shouted from every direction. Camera flashes like lightning. Within an hour, the recordings had been uploaded to every news site. Within 2 hours, they'd gone viral. By evening, believe Harper was trending nationwide. Brandon's empire began to crumble in real time. Board members at Westfield Innovations resigned. Investors pulled funding. The IPO was canceled. His carefully constructed image shattered like glass. Harper returned to Patricia's apartment, exhausted but lighter. She'd told the truth. Finally, completely. No more hiding. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Against her better judgment. She answered. "Hello, Harper." Brandon's voice, cold and controlled. "Enjoy your moment of triumph, because I'm out on bail. GPS monitor is easy enough to remove, and my lawyers can only do so much. Eventually, I handle problems myself." The line went dead. Harper's hands shook. "He threatened me. He's going to—" "We're calling Detective Shaw right now," Garrett said, already dialing. "He just violated bail conditions. They'll revoke it." But when Detective Shaw arrived 30 minutes later, his face was grim. "We can't trace the call. It came from a burner phone, and without proof it was actually Brandon. We cannot revoke bail based on suspicion." "He's going to kill me," Harper whispered. "No," Dr. Ross said firmly. "He's not, because you're not going to be alone. We're all staying together until the trial. Safety in numbers." But 3 days later, Harper woke to breaking news. A fire at the headquarters of Westfield Innovations destroyed key evidence in the fraud case against CEO Brandon Westfield. Investigators are calling it arson. The financial records, Patricia's evidence, all gone. Brandon was destroying anything that could convict him. Harper's phone buzzed. Text from unknown number. "The fire was just the beginning. Drop the charges, or everyone you love gets hurt. Starting with your mother." A photo attached. Harper's mother, walking to her car, a red crosshair digitally added over her head. Harper showed Garrett the phone, her demand shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. "We need to go to Shaw now," Garrett said. "This is a direct bridge." But Harper's mind was racing. Brandon had unlimited resources. He'd already escaped once. Even if they arrested him again, his lawyers would find a loophole. The trial could take months. He had time to hurt everyone she loved, unless she gave him what he wanted. "I'm dropping the charges," Harper said quietly. "What?" "No. If I don't, he'll kill someone, maybe all of us. You saw what he did to the evidence. He's not going to stop." Harper felt the fight draining out of her. "He wins. He always wins." "Harper, listen to me," Jennifer said urgently. "He wants you to feel helpless. That's his weapon, but we have backups of everything. The evidence exists. We can rebuild the case." "How long will that take? Weeks, months? How many people does he hurt while we're gathering evidence?" Harper shook her head. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, but I can't." She called Sarah Martinez. "I'm dropping the charges. All of them. Whatever it takes to make him leave me alone. Harper, if you do this, he goes free. He wins." "I know," Harper whispered. "But at least everyone I love stays alive." That night, Harper sat alone in Patricia's apartment while the coalition tried to change her mind, but she was done. 3 years of abuse had taught her one lesson: Brandon always won. Fighting him only made things worse. Her phone rang. "Dr. Ross." "Don't give up," Dr. Ross said. "Please, come to Seattle Grace tomorrow morning. There's someone I want you to meet." "Doctor, just trust me. One more time. If you still wanted to quit after this meeting, I won't stop you." Harper almost said no, but something in Dr. Ross's voice made her agree. The next morning, she met Dr. Ross in the hospital cafeteria. Sitting across from them was a woman in her 40s. Professional suit, tired eyes. "Harper, this is FBI Special Agent Diana Reeves," Dr. Ross said. "She's been investigating Brandon Westfield for 2 years." Harper's heart skipped. "The FBI's White Collar Crimes Division," Agent Reeves said. "We've been building a federal case against Westfield Innovations for securities fraud and money laundering. The evidence you've gathered, it's the final piece we needed. The arson of his company headquarters. That's destruction of evidence in a federal investigation. That's a separate felony. Brandon can't bribe or threaten his way out of federal charges," Dr. Ross added. "The FBI has jurisdiction. He goes to a federal prison. No bail this time." Agent Reeves leaned forward. "Harper, I need you to testify, not in state court, in federal court. We have enough to put him away for 20 years on the fraud charges alone. Add in the assault, the attempted murder, the witness intimidation. He'll never get out. Hope flickered again in Harper's chest. You can really stop him. We can end him, and Agent Reeves has said. Completely. But I need you to be brave one more time. Can you do that? Harper thought about her baby, about Jennifer, Alexis, Patricia, and all the other women Brandon had hurt, about the person she used to be before Brandon had broken her. Yes, she said. I can do that. The federal courthouse in downtown Seattle looked like a fortress. Harper stood at the bottom of the stone steps, camera flashes exploding around her. Protesters lined both sides of the walkway. Some held signs saying justice for Harper. Others screamed that she was a liar, a gold digger, a false accuser. Garrett took her arm. Don't look at them. Just walk. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Harper took her seat in the witness section, surrounded by the coalition. Jennifer squeezed her hand. Patricia offered a small nod of encouragement. Even Mallory was there, pale but determined. Brandon sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, flanked by 3 lawyers. When Harper entered, he turned and smiled at her. Not a threatening smile, a pitying one, like she was a child throwing a tantrum he was forced to endure. The judge entered. The United States versus Brandon Westfield. Let's begin. The prosecution opened with Patricia's testimony. She walked through years of financial fraud, showed documents Brandon had ordered her to falsify, described meetings where Brandon had explicitly discussed laundering money through shell companies. Brandon's lawyers tried to discredit her, suggested she was a disgruntled employee, implied she was mentally unstable. Ms. Whitmore, isn't it true you were fired from Westfield Innovations for poor performance? The defense attorney asked. I was forced to resign after reporting illegal activities, Patricia corrected calmly. And I have emails proving Mr. Westfield threatened my family if I went to authorities. The emails were entered into evidence. Clear, undeniable. Jennifer testified next. Described the physical abuse during their relationship, showed medical records of broken bones, explained how Brandon had paid her $2 million to sign an NDA and disappear. The NDA included a clause stating that if I ever spoke about Brandon, he would sue me for $10 million. Jennifer said, I signed it because I was terrified, because he'd threatened to kill me if I went to the police. Brandon's lawyer stood. Ms. Morrison, you accepted $2 million from my client. Doesn't that suggest this was a mutually agreed upon settlement rather than it was hush money? Jennifer said flatly. And I'm violating the NDA right now to tell the truth. Sue me for $10 million. I don't care anymore. The jury shifted. Several members were taking notes. Alexis testified about the psychological abuse, the manipulation, the suicide attempts. Her therapist's notes were entered into evidence, detailing how Brandon had systematically destroyed her mental health. Dr. Ross testified about the pattern of injuries. 6 women over 7 years, all with similar bruising patterns, all claiming accidents, all terrified to speak. Garrett presented the financial evidence. Shell companies, hidden accounts, $17 million embezzled from Westfield Innovations investors. FBI agent Reeves testified about the federal investigation, the wire fraud, the securities violations, the money laundering operation. Then it was Harper's turn. She walked to the witness stand, hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. When she looked at the jury, she saw faces struggling to remain neutral. Some sympathetic, some skeptical. The prosecutor, a woman named Catherine Mills, approached gently. Mrs. Westfield, can you tell the jury about your relationship with the defendant? Harper took a breath. Started from the beginning, the whirlwind romance. The charming man who'd swept her off her feet. The gradual isolation from friends and family. The first time he grabbed her arm hard enough to leave bruises. I thought it was stress from his work, Harper said quietly. I made excuses. I loved him. I thought I could help him. When did the abuse escalate? When I got pregnant. Harper's voice stayed steady. Brandon didn't want children. He saw the baby as a trap, an obligation he hadn't agreed to. She described the night of the staircase, the fight over the prenup, Brandon's rage, the recordings that had captured everything. What happened after the fall? I woke up in the hospital. Dr. Ross told me my baby was dead. Harper's voice cracked slightly. Brandon came to my room. He told me to lie to the police, said it was an accident, said if I told the truth, he'd destroy me. The prosecutor played the recording. Brandon's voice filled the courtroom. You were nobody. I made you somebody. You're lucky I don't throw you out right now. Then the escalation, the threats, the sound of impact and Harper's scream. Finally, the confession, that fall was your own fault for defying me. When the recording ended, several jury members were crying. Brandon's lawyer stood for cross-examination. Marcus Crawford was known for his aggressive style. Harper braced herself. Mrs. Westfield, you've admitted to making recordings without my client's knowledge or consent. Isn't that illegal in Washington state? Washington is a two-party consent state. Harper agreed. But there's an exception when one party reasonably believes a crime is being committed. I was documenting abuse. Or you were gathering ammunition for a divorce, Crawford suggested. You've also admitted to conspiring with Mr. Westfield's brother, Garrett, to destroy his reputation. Isn't this whole case just an elaborate revenge plot? No, Harper said firmly. This case is about justice for assault, fraud, and attempted murder. Attempted murder. Crawford's voice dripped with skepticism. You fell downstairs, Mrs. Westfield. Tragic. Yes, but hardly. He pushed me. Harper met his eyes. I have it on recording. The jury heard it. Stop trying to gaslight me the way your client did for 3 years. The courtroom went silent. Crawford's face flushed. No further questions. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witness after witness. Evidence stacked so high it seemed impossible to ignore. But Brandon's lawyers fought every inch, suggesting Harper was mentally unstable, that the coalition had coordinated their stories, that the evidence was circumstantial. On the final day, both sides gave closing arguments. The defense painted Brandon as a victim of jealous ex-girlfriends and a vindictive ex-wife, claimed the financial crimes were accounting errors, suggested Harper had caused her own injuries and blamed Brandon. Then Catherine Mills stood for the prosecution. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've heard 3 weeks of testimony. 6 women, all with the same story, all describing the same pattern of abuso, manipulation, and violence, all with medical records, text messages, recordings, and evidence. You've heard FBI agents testify about millions of dollars in fraud. You've heard Dr. Ross describe suspicious injuries spanning 7 years. Mills walked to the evidence table, picked up Harper's phone. This recording is the voice of a woman begging for her life, begging her husband not to hurt her baby. And you hear him push her anyway. You hear her scream, you hear the impact. Mills set the phone down. Brandon Westfield is not a victim. He's a predator, a man who built an empire on lies and maintained it through violence. The evidence is overwhelming. The pattern is undeniable. And now you must decide, do we hold powerful men accountable for their crimes, or do we let them win because they have money and lawyers and influence? She looked at each jury member in turn. I'm asking you to be brave, to look at the evidence and see the truth, to give Harper Westfield and all the other women he hurt the justice they deserve. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Harper spent every minute in Patricia's apartment, unable to eat or sleep. What if the jury believed Brandon's lawyers? What if the money and power won again? On the afternoon of the second day, her phone rang. Sarah Martinez. The jury's reached a verdict. Get to the courthouse now. Harper arrived to find cameras everywhere. The coalition surrounded her as they walked into the courtroom. Brandon sat at the defense table, jaw tight, hands clenched. The jury filed in. Harper couldn't read their faces. The 4 persons stood. On the charge of securities fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of embezzlement, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of money laundering, we find the defendant guilty. The list continued. 17 counts of fraud, 5 counts of assault, 1 count of attempted murder. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Brandon's face went white. His mother let out a strangled sound. His lawyers immediately moved for appeal. The judge banged her gavel. Mr. Westfield, you are remanded into custody pending sentencing. Bail is revoked. Federal marshals approached. Brandon looked at Harper as they put handcuffs on him. For the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. Not rage, not confidence. Fear. You'll regret this, he mouthed. Harper shook her head. No, I won't. They led him away, through the back door, to a federal detention center where money and influence meant nothing. Harper felt tears streaming down her face, not tears of sadness, tears of relief so intense she could barely stand. "We did it," Jennifer whispered. "We actually did it." The coalition held each other, crying and laughing, while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions. For the first time in years, Harper felt safe. 3 months after the guilty verdict, Harper sat in the federal courthouse for Brandon's sentencing hearing. The courtroom was quieter this time. Most of the media had moved on to other stories, but the coalition remained. A united front. Brandon entered in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed. 3 months in federal detention had changed him. The polished CEO was gone, replaced by someone diminished, thinner, harder, but still angry. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Eleanor Martinez, reviewed the case file. "Mr. Westfield, you've been found guilty on 23 counts of fraud, assault, and attempted murder. Before I announce your sentence, the victims have the right to make impact statements. We'll begin with Patricia Whitmore." Patricia stood, facing Brandon directly. "You destroyed my career because I tried to do the right thing. You threatened my family. You made me afraid to leave my house for 2 years. But I'm not afraid anymore. And I hope you spend every day of your sentence understanding what it feels like to be powerless." Jennifer went next. "You broke 3 of my ribs. You fractured my wrist. But worse than the physical pain was the psychological torture, the constant fear, the belief that I deserved it. I spent years in therapy trying to undo the damage you caused. I hope prison teaches you something you never learned: accountability." Alexa spoke quietly. "I tried to kill myself twice because of you. I thought I was worthless, crazy, the problem. But I wasn't. You were. And now everyone knows it." Mallory's voice shook. "I helped you hurt Harper because I believed your lies. I'll live with that guilt forever. But you'll live with the knowledge that your own manipulation tactics were your downfall." Dr. Ross didn't give a victim statement, but she'd submitted a report detailing the pattern of abuse. The judge referenced it directly. Dr. Ross's documentation shows a 7-year pattern of targeting vulnerable women, isolating them, and inflicting severe psychological and physical trauma. This court takes such patterns very seriously. Then Harper stood. For a moment, she just looked at Brandon, remembered the man she'd loved, mourned the future they'd never have. Then she spoke. "You killed our baby. You destroyed everything I'd built. You tried to make me believe I was worthless, crazy, the cause of my own suffering. But I survived. And I want you to know something: I forgive you." Brandon's head snapped up, confusion flickering across his face. "Not because you deserve forgiveness," Harper continued, "but because I deserve peace. I'm not going to carry hatred for you anymore. You don't get to live in my head. You don't get any more of my life. This is the last time I'll ever think about you. And that's your real punishment. Not the prison sentence. The fact that you'll be forgotten." She sat down. Brandon stared at her, something like devastation in his eyes. Being forgotten was worse than being hated. Harper knew that, and she'd just given him a life sentence of irrelevance. Judge Martinez spoke. "Mr. Westfield, in my 30 years on the bench, I've seen many cases of domestic violence. What distinguishes yours is the systematic, calculated nature of your abuse. You didn't lose control. You chose violence as a tool of domination. You manipulated multiple women, destroyed careers, and committed serious financial crimes. This behavior demonstrates a complete lack of empathy or remorse." She looked at Brandon directly. "On the fraud and embezzlement charges, I sentence you to 20 years in federal prison. On the assault charges, an additional 10 years, to be served consecutively. On the attempted murder charge, 15 years, also consecutive. Total sentence 45 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole before serving 30 years. The courtroom erupted. Brandon's lawyers immediately began arguing for appeal. His mother sobbed. But the sentence stood. 45 years. Brandon was 34. He'd be 64 before he could even apply for parole. His entire life, gone. Harper felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a quiet sense of closure. As the marshals led Brandon away, he looked back once, not at his mother or his lawyers, at Harper. She didn't look away, didn't flinch, just watched him disappear through the doors. It's over, Garrett said quietly beside her. Yeah, Harper whispered. It really is. 6 months after Brandon's sentencing, Harper stood in front of a mirror in a small apartment in Portland, Oregon. She'd left Seattle the week after the trial ended. Too many memories. Too many people who still saw her as Brandon Westfield's victim. Here, she was just Harper. No last name needed. No past to explain. She'd gone back to law school. Not to practice corporate law like before, but to specialize in domestic violence advocacy. 3 nights a week, she volunteered at a women's shelter, helping survivors navigate the legal system. Her phone rang. Jennifer? Hey! Jennifer's voice was warm. How's Portland treating you? Good. Rainy. Quiet. Exactly what I needed. The coalition's meeting next week. You should come. We're planning a foundation for DV survivors, legal support, therapy funding, safe housing. Patricia's handling the business side. I'm working on fundraising. We need you for the legal framework. Harper smiled. Send me the details. I'll be there. After hanging up, she looked around her apartment. It was small, nothing like the glass mansion, but it was hers. Paid for with money from a settlement, Brandon's company had paid to avoid further litigation. Every stick of furniture chosen by her. Every wall painted a color she liked. Freedom looked like a small apartment in student loan debt. And Harper had never been happier. A knock on her door. Harper checked the peephole. Garrett stood outside, holding coffee and pastries. Surprise visit, he said when she opened the door. Hope that's okay. They sat on her small balcony, drinking coffee and watching the rain. Over the past 6 months, Garrett had visited every few weeks, never pushing for more than friendship, just being present, steady, safe. I published the article, Garrett said. The full investigation into Brandon, it's running in the Tribune tomorrow. The one you've been working on for 3 years. Yeah. I wanted to wait until after sentencing so it couldn't interfere with the trial. But now it's time. People need to understand how someone like Brandon operates, how he built an empire on fraud and maintained it through fear. Harper nodded. Will it help others? I think so. Other journalists are already using it as a template for investigating powerful abusers. The patterns Brandon used aren't unique, but now they're documented, exposed. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Garrett spoke again. I don't want to rush anything, he said carefully, but I need you to know I'm not going anywhere, whether you ever want more than friendship or not. I'm here, for however long you need me to be. Harper looked at him, really looked. Garrett had been her ally when everyone else believed Brandon's lies, had risked his relationship with his family to help her, had never once made her feel weak or broken. I'm not ready, she said honestly. I don't know when I will be. That's okay, Garrett said. I'll be here when you are. If you are, Ami, and if you were never ready, I'll still be your friend. Harper reached for his hand. Thank you for everything. They sat together, watching the rain fall on Portland, while in Seattle, the Tribune published Garrett's expose and the world learned the full truth about Brandon Westfield. 1 year after the trial, Harper walked into Seattle Grace Hospital carrying a bouquet of flowers. Dr. Mark Ross met her in the lobby, smiling. Harper, it's so good to see you. They hugged. Over the past year, Dr. Wish had become more than a doctor who'd saved her life. She'd become a friend, a mentor. The woman who'd shown Harper that believing victims was the first step toward justice. I wanted to thank you, Harper said, for believing me when no one else did, for organizing the coalition, for everything. Dr. Ross shook her head. You did the hard work. I just provided a safe place to do it. They walked through the hospital together, past the emergency room where Harper had been brought after the fall, past the room where she'd learned her baby was dead. Places that had once represented trauma now just looked like a hospital. I want to show you something, Dr. Ross said. She led Harper to a new wing of the hospital. A sign above the door read, Harper's Haven, Domestic Violence Resource Center. Harper stopped. What is this? A resource center for DV victims, 24-hour legal support, emergency housing coordination, therapy services, all free, all confidential. Shudder. Ross smiled. Patricia donated the funding. Jennifer organized the medical partnerships. Alexis designed the counseling program. And we named it after you. Because you were the one who was brave enough to stand up first. Harper felt tears burning her eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll come speak at the opening ceremony next month. Tell your story. Give hope to other women who think they'll never escape. Harper nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. Inside Harper's haven, the walls were painted soft blues and greens. Comfortable chairs filled quiet rooms. Resources lined the walls. Phone numbers for hotlines. Legal aid information. Therapy referrals. And in the main room, a plaque in memory of the child Harper Westfield lost and in honor of all the children who deserve to grow up in homes free from violence. Harper pressed her hand to the plaque, thinking of her baby, the life that had been stolen, the future that would never exist. They'll never be forgotten, Dr. Ross said softly. Every child we save through this center is a living testament to them. 1 month later, Harper stood before a crowd of 200 people at the opening ceremony for Harper's Haven. Cameras filmed her speech. Survivors held hands in the audience. The coalition sat in the front row, smiling up at her. My name is Harper, she began, and I'm a survivor of domestic violence. 3 years ago, I was trapped in an abusive marriage, and 2 years ago, I lost my baby when my husband pushed me down a flight of stairs. 1 year ago, I testified against him in federal court. She paused, gathering strength. I'm not here to tell you recovery is easy. It's not. Some days, I still have nightmares. Some days, I still feel the fear. But I'm here to tell you that recovery is possible, that justice is possible, that you can survive and become stronger in the broken places. Harper looked at the survivors in the audience. If you're in danger right now, get out. Use resources like Harper's Haven. Call the National Domestic Violence Hotline. Tell someone you trust. You are not alone. You are not crazy. You are not the problem. She took a breath. And to the abusers who think they'll always win, your time is up. We're done being silent. We're done being afraid. We're building coalitions. We're supporting each other. We're changing laws and funding resources and teaching the next generation that violence is never love. Her voice grew stronger. You can hit us. You can threaten us. You can try to destroy us. But we will survive, and we will make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. The audience rose to their feet, applauding. Harper saw tears on faces throughout the crowd. Survivors who'd found hope in her story. Women who'd realized they weren't alone. After the ceremony, a young woman approached Harper. She was maybe 25, with a black eye poorly covered by makeup and a nervous energy that Harper recognized immediately. Thank you, the woman whispered, for telling your story. I've been with my boyfriend for 2 years. He says he loves me, but her voice broke. He hurts me, and I thought it was my fault. But listening to you, I realized it's not. It's never been my fault. Harper took the woman's hands. It's not your fault. It was never your fault. Do you have somewhere safe to go? The woman shook her head. Harper looked at Dr. Ross, who nodded. We have space in our emergency housing program. You can stay tonight. We'll help you figure out next steps. The woman's tears fell freely now. Thank you. Thank you so much. Harper hugged her. You're going to be okay. I promise. Later that evening, Harper and Garrett walked along the Seattle waterfront. The city lights reflected on the water. In the distance, the glass mansion where Harper had lived with Brandon sat empty, up for sale. Nobody wanted to buy the house where a crime had been committed. You did good today, Garrett said. That speech was powerful. I meant every word, Harper replied. I spent so long being silent. Now I can't seem to stop talking. Garrett laughed. Good. The world needs to hear your voice. They walked in comfortable silence for a while. Over the past year, their friendship had deepened. Slowly, carefully, no rush, no pressure. Can I tell you something? Harper said, always. I think I'm ready to try, not marriage or moving in or anything big, just trying. Garrett stopped walking. You sure? Because I meant what I said. I'm not going anywhere regardless. I'm sure, Harper said. You've been patient. You've been kind. You've let me heal at my own pace. I think the woman I'm becoming wants to see what the future could look like. With you, Garrett smiled, the kind of smile that reached his eyes. Then let's find out. Together, one day at a time. He offered his hand. Harper took it. They walked along the waterfront while the city lights glowed and the water moved beneath them, carrying away the past and promising a future neither of them had imagined. A future built not on fairy tales or rescue, but on mutual respect, genuine care, and the hard-won strength of someone who'd survived hell and chosen to keep living anyway. Harper looked at the skyline, surveying at the city that had witnessed her breaking and her rebuilding. She thought about the baby she'd lost, the woman she used to be, the survivor she'd become. Breaking isn't the end, she whispered. It's where you start building something stronger. Garrett squeezed her hand. And you built something incredible. Harper smiled. For the first time in 4 years, she looked toward tomorrow without fear. She was finally free.